At exactly 2:17 a.m., his phone buzzed, loud enough to cut through the silence of the room. He hadn't been asleep, just lying there, staring into the dark, listening to the faint hum of his fan. Slowly, he reached for the phone, the glow lighting up his face. There was one message, no contact name, just a number and 3 words. Don't open it. He frowned, confused, because he hadn't opened anything yet. No links, no apps, nothing. His thumb hovered over the screen as a strange feeling settled in his chest. Then another message came in. If you're reading this, it's already too late. His heartbeat picked up as a cold tension crept through him. He stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince himself it was just a prank, until his eyes dropped to the sender, and he froze, because the message had been sent from his own phone number. His name was Daniel, a quiet, ordinary guy who lived alone and worked remotely. Someone who didn't have many friends and preferred it that way. Someone who didn't like noise, didn't like attention, and definitely didn't believe in anything supernatural. That night felt normal, too normal, as rain tapped gently against his window and the power flickered once before stabilizing. He had just finished eating, phone in hand, scrolling mindlessly, his mind half present and half drifting, until it happened, until that message appeared from his own number. Daniel stared at the screen, confused, curious, and a little irritated as his eyes stayed fixed on the message. Probably a glitch, he whispered under his breath, trying to dismiss the strange feeling creeping into his chest. But then another message came in. You need to listen carefully. His breathing slowed, his fingers tightening slightly around the phone as the silence in the room grew heavier. He hesitated for a second, then typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came instantly, "You." And just like that, a cold, suffocating silence filled the room. At exactly 2:25, someone will knock, the message read, and Daniel scoffed quietly, shaking his head as he muttered that no one even knew where he lived. Yet his eyes still drifted back to the time on his phone, which read 2:23 a.m. He kept watching despite himself, the seconds stretching longer than they should as the room seemed to grow heavier around him. When the time changed to 2:24, a faint tension settled deep in his chest, tightening slowly as his grip on the phone unconsciously firmed. When it finally turned 2:25, the silence felt almost deliberate, and then a knock landed on the door, slow, heavy, and precise, sending a violent jolt through his body as his heart slammed hard against his chest. He froze completely, unable to move, unable to breathe, as the sound echoed through the apartment, and before he could gather a thought, his phone buzzed again with another message telling him not to open the door. The knocking returned almost immediately, louder now, sharper, more aggressive, each hit striking with a force that felt less like patience and more like urgency. Daniel forced himself to stand, his movement stiff and unnatural as he began walking toward the door, each step heavier than the last, as though something unseen was guiding him forward. His hand slowly lifted and hovered just above the handle, hesitation locking him in place. When his phone buzzed once more, the screen lighting up with a final warning that if he opened it, he would die. That was enough to stop him completely. He froze where he stood, every muscle locked, and in that exact moment, the knocking stopped. No gradual fade, no retreating footsteps, no sign that anything had been there at all. Just silence, thick and unnatural, pressing into the room in a way that no ordinary quiet ever could, as though whatever had been outside was no longer trying to get in, but was already inside. Daniel stepped back, his heart racing uncontrollably as the weight of everything settled in. "Okay, this isn't normal," he muttered, his voice low and uneven, as he forced himself to move closer to the door. Slowly, he leaned in and checked the peephole, holding his breath as he looked through it. But there was nothing there, no movement, no shadow, just darkness staring back at him. He pulled away, unsettled, his mind struggling to keep up as he turned and took a few steps back, trying to calm himself, trying to think. Then his phone buzzed. "You checked the door." The words hit instantly. Daniel spun around, his eyes wide as his gaze darted back to the door. "How do you know that?" he whispered, his voice sharper now, filled with confusion and fear. Almost immediately, another message appeared. "Because I already did." His throat went dry as the meaning settled in, heavy and impossible. And for the first time that night, Daniel felt something he couldn't explain. Not confusion, not curiosity, but fear that was real. Listen carefully. "You have 60 minutes, the message read, and before Daniel could even process it, another followed, telling him that things would start happening and that he had to follow every instruction exactly. His hands began to tremble, the phone unsteady in his grip as the weight of the words pressed down on him, heavier than anything he had felt all night. His mind raced for something logical, something that made sense, but nothing came. Swallowing hard, he managed to type back, asking what would happen if he didn't. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence. Then, a reply appeared. "You already tried that." Daniel stared at the screen, his breath catching as a cold realization crept in, slow and suffocating, like something he should remember. But couldn't. The lights went out without warning, plunging the room into total darkness. And Daniel gasped as the only thing left illuminating the space was the faint glow of his phone in his trembling hand, his breath unsteady as he tried to process what had just happened. For a moment, everything felt frozen, unnaturally still, until he heard footsteps, soft at first, then clearer, deliberate, coming from inside the house, not outside, not upstairs, but right behind him. His entire body went rigid as the sound settled into the silence, each step measured and controlled, closing in on a distance he couldn't see, and his throat tightened as he slowly forced himself to turn, inch by inch, his heart pounding louder with every movement until he was facing the darkness. There was nothing there. No figure, no shadow, no movement, but the feeling didn't leave. It stayed, heavy and undeniable, pressing into him from every direction. And in that moment, Daniel understood with terrifying certainty that he wasn't alone. Another message appeared, warning him not to look in the mirror. But almost immediately, instinct took over, and Daniel turned toward it. And that was when he saw something move behind him, too fast, too unnatural, causing him to spin around instantly, his heart racing, only to find nothing there. The room stood empty, still, silent. Yet when he slowly turned back, the mirror told a different story. It showed someone standing directly behind him, close enough to touch, smiling in a way that didn't feel human. And Daniel screamed, the sound tearing out of him as he dropped his phone, the screen cracking on impact. But even then, the messages didn't stop. A new one appeared. "You weren't supposed to look." The temperature in the room dropped sharply, the cold settling into his skin as his breath became visible in the air, each exhale heavier than the last. And then that same slow knock returned, but this time, it wasn't coming from the door. It came from inside the walls, dull and deliberate, echoing around him as if the entire apartment was alive. Shaking uncontrollably, Daniel bent down and grabbed his phone, his fingers barely steady enough to hold it as he typed out the only question left in his mind, asking who it was, who was doing this to him, and the reply came almost instantly. "I'm what's left of you." The words sank in slowly, twisting something deep inside him as silence followed, thick and suffocating, stretching just long enough to make him hope it was over, until the final message appeared. "It's already inside." The clock hit 3 a.m., and everything stopped at once. No sound, no movement, just darkness pressing in from every corner as the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, one last message appeared on Daniel's screen, warning him not to turn around. And slowly, as if any sudden move might break something fragile, he closed his eyes, forcing himself to stay still, forcing himself to breathe, even as the silence grew heavier around him. Then he felt it, right behind him, a presence he couldn't see but couldn't deny, followed by a whisper, cold, close, and deeply unnatural, brushing against him with quiet certainty. "You didn't listen." The next morning, the police broke into Daniel's apartment after neighbors reported hearing screams during the night, and what they found stopped everything. Daniel was there, lifeless, his body still, his eyes wide open as if frozen in the exact moment of realization, his phone still clutched in his hand with the screen cracked but glowing faintly. And on that screen, there was one final message, sent at exactly 3:01 a.m. from Daniel's number to Daniel. "Now you understand." And here's the part no one could explain. When investigators checked his phone records, there were no outgoing messages, No unknown numbers, no trace of anything unusual, nothing at all except for one detail that didn't make sense. At exactly 2:17 a.m., a message had been scheduled from his phone days before it ever happened. Some messages don't come from strangers. They come from truths you were never meant to discover, only on Midnight Truth, where every story ends, but the fear never does.